Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us. My name is Mark Sneider. I'm owner-president of RSW US, and want to welcome David Baker, who's joined us today, one of our six thought leaders who graciously submitted questions for our thought leader survey. For those of you that don't know David, David's an author, speaker, and advisor to expert marketing firms, helping them make better business decisions. He's worked directly with over 900 firms, and hundreds of thousands have been through his seminars or read his books for principals. You can learn more about David and the work that he's doing by visiting http /expertise.is. That's expertise.is. And David, want to welcome you. Appreciate the time today. I know you're a busy guy, so thanks for giving us a bit of your time.
Glad to be here, Mark.
Great.
It's exciting to talk about this. Appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So David submitted a number of questions for our Thought Leader survey around the topic of new business, and so we're going to get some of his perspective today on the responses that we got from the agencies that responded to the survey. I'll go ahead and just jump right into it. We see that over 60% of the folks in agencies that are responsible for new business are also managing existing accounts. And I'm just curious, why you think that number is as high as it is. It was interesting to see that there were so many agency folks responsible for doing both. What do you think is the root cause of that?
I was surprised, actually. I had no idea what we would find. If you'd asked me to guess what the number would have been, it probably would have been like in the 25, 35%. So I was very surprised. I would guess that there are two reasons why we found that. One is that folks just aren't really aware of some of the challenges that come in combining those two roles, so it's a matter of education. The other would be because it's more common to combine those roles with smaller firms where you don't have the luxury of separating the two. So I think it's probably a mix of both of those. Although, when I talk with clients about this particular issue, even the firms who are sort of violating that basic tenet, they understand the challenge of it, and so it's they're doing it willingly. Like, they know it's not a surprise to them, but they still decide to go ahead and do it anyway.
Okay, and do you think that's just based on what you've seen in the industry, is combining those roles problematic, or do you think it can work, or what's your perspective on that?
Well, I don't like with a smaller firm. I'm not sure we really have much choice. You pretty much have to do that, and usually it's the principal that's involved. But usually it's the second phase of restructuring the roles of the firm. In that second phase, the principal peels off the managing of accounts but retains the new business role. So I do believe that to whatever extent the firm is doing their own new business, the principal needs to be very much involved. But the problem with it isn't that those two roles are not requiring the same thing, because the skills are very, very similar. The problem is that new business gets pushed off because it's not as urgent as managing an account. So that if you put off searching for new business today, nothing bad happens to your firm. But if you do that 150 days in a row, things start happening to your firm. And so you're in the business of serving clients, and then eventually you discover that you're owned by your clients because you don't have any other options.
Right. Yeah, I'm somewhat surprised to hear you say that the sort of the skill sets of the project manager and the skill sets of the new business director are fairly similar. I just, my gut would say, and maybe you've seen differently, that the person managing new business needs to be a little bit more, more of the hunter versus sort of the nurturer. Any perspective on that, or anything you've seen?
So let me clarify first. There are three roles that we're talking about. There's
Okay.
new business, there's account service that's managing the relationship with the client,
Right.
and then there's project management.
Okay.
And project management should absolutely be separated from account management,
Got
no
it.
matter how big the firm is. So here we're talking about, should there be a distinction between new business and account service? And there should be, because the one pushes out the other,
Got
not
it.
because those roles are different. So
Okay.
like, for instance, if you see a firm that is always bringing the new business development people back into client relationships to
Right.
help grow them, then you have a messed up system, because
Okay.
account people should be able to grow accounts. If they can't
Right.
grow accounts, they're not account people.
Yep. Yep. That makes sense. Okay. Got it. Thank
Yeah.
you. So, uh, in the survey, you talk about checking all the boxes when evaluating the value of a marketing prospect. And just curious, what are some of the key things that agencies should be looking at when evaluating the value of a new prospect? That they're either comes to
Right.
them or they unearth themselves.
Sure. So I think, like, I can list a bunch of them, but I wouldn't say they're all equal. Like,
Okay.
this would be, if a particular prospect met all of these, it'd be a wonderful world. Very seldom does it happen that way. So there are really three core ones in my mind, and that's not to say that you can't look back over your experience and demonstrate that you've turned somebody who didn't meet this criteria into a great client. I'm not saying that. It's just, in general, you don't want to violate these things. The first most important thing you're looking for is that you are not their first agency. So
Okay.
they have worked with another agency before. Again, people have broken in new agencies and say, hey, that was a great client. I know that happens, but it's very rare.
Right.
Second, you want to be working with the decision maker for sure. You cannot be working through somebody else to get to the decision maker. You may not be working with the decision maker every day, but you need to have direct access to them, unfettered access. And third, they should not be spending their own money. So they need to be somebody with sufficient authority in a larger organization, with power over a budget that's not their own money. They're not a developer. They don't own a restaurant. They're professional marketers. So those are the three, and then you can add other things to it, like maybe the most important thing next would be they're big enough. Like, if
Sure.
so a client may only use you for a small project, but if they like you, is there enough in that relationship to make, like, are you only dating prospects that you're willing to marry? Like, is there marriage potential in this relationship? So those are the three important
Okay.
ones. Yeah.
Um, uh, Budget, I assume, is something that agencies should be concerned about and do their best to try and unearth sort of what the marketer potentially is going to spend. We know that, at least we see it. Marketers, at least in the early stages of engagement, aren't all that forthcoming with what they're spending. Any
Right.
advice you might be able to give an agency to try and get a sense as to how big this marriage could be, using the analogy that you just
Right.
shared? Any thoughts there?
Mhm. And that's a great example of a category where we would love to know the budget, but we wouldn't necessarily rule out this client if we
Okay.
don't know it.
Okay.
I've just found that the best relationships between client and agency are such where the client says, "This is my budget," and their thought is, after that, second stage is, what can we get for that money, as opposed to the client who isn't very forthcoming and wants to send this out to three different agencies to bid and then
Sure.
picks the lowest one. That's just a terrible relationship. So I think that there are many great client relationships where you don't know what the budget is, but you can still, that's the advantage of publishing at least some basic ranges on your website. And if you're positioned well, and if you know what you're doing, then most of your clients are using most of the same services most of the time. And
Right.
so the relationship doesn't look radically different from one client to the next. And so it's very possible in that scenario to have an idea of what it costs, what it's like to be a client of
Right.
yours.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned just sort of publishing on your site, and it was one of the questions I was going to ask you about. You talked about in your piece of advice, so one piece of advice, suggesting that agencies should publish basic client criteria on their website so prospects can kind of self-select themselves either in or out. My question is, what kind of criteria would you suggest that an
Mhm.
agency publish, and how have you seen that help agencies that you've worked with?
Right. So partly it's subjective, but it also indicates to the prospective client that wow, this firm knows exactly who they can help, and we know that they know that because they tell us who they can't help, and so there's a lot of faith when they say they can help this kind of a firm. But it's a little tricky in the sense that I believe we should do it because principals have demonstrated time and again that they cannot be trusted with compromise. And so when they get the opportunity to land a new client, all of these dream characteristics of their prospect are thrown out because this seems like such a great opportunity, or because even they know it's not a great opportunity, but we have people that need work, we need to feed the machine. So
Right.
this keeps them honest, right? It helps the prospect self-select themselves out of the running. Why? Because that way the principal never gets the opportunity to compromise in a way that sometimes you have to take those clients, but don't pretend that you're going to turn them into great clients. What they are just clients that are going to get you somewhere else, or they are never going to bring you a lot of money, and you know that you're going to dump them after a year and a half, but at least you're honest about that.
Right, right, okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you about the needy agency that needs to fill capacity, and we've all seen agencies sort of work their way through those compromises and decide to bring a new client on board. I mean, any counsel for that agency that is not in the best of positions and needs work. Are there certain things you should or shouldn't compromise on, or any advice for that kind of a firm?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I imagine agencies hire you sometimes past when you wish they would, when they're a little too desperate, and so they're faced with those compromises frequently. I feel like it's if you lose the ability to say no, you no longer have any power in the relationship. But there are times when you honestly don't have the power to say no. So you take those clients, but don't pretend that you're going to turn them into great ones. So
Okay.
just acknowledge from the start, listen, we're going to do good work for these people. We're going to earn the money, but we're still going to keep looking for other clients
Yep.
because we don't think we'll turn this one into a great one.
Yep. Yep. That's great advice. Getting back to the checklist. What have you seen among agencies when they don't have the checklist? Is it just bringing in the wrong kind of client? Do they literally do you advise clients to literally have a physical checklist they run through, or is this just something they, maybe you can kind of elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. So I do think they have two forms of the checklist. One is very brutal. It's maybe got 10 or 12 points on it, and they use it internally to help them decide whether they should take this client. And then they should have one that's slimmed way down that uses comfortable client-friendly language that's published on the website to
Okay.
help prospects with that. I don't understand why new business takes so long evaluating the fit. It seems to me like what takes long is all of this twisting they do, trying to talk themselves into the fact that it's a great opportunity when nobody honestly believes that. So I so believe in strong positioning and constant new business efforts. What I don't believe in is constant compromise in that front. So the list helps you internally and it helps you externally. And there are probably 50 firms out there that are using these lists on their website and doing it very effectively. It's very friendly, it's very confident, And when you show those lists to agencies and they say, "Oh, I could never do that," and you ask them why, it's often because they they're afraid that they're never going to get to talk with that prospect, and they want that opportunity because they don't think they're good at landing at attracting opportunities, but they feel like once they get in the room with the prospect, they will always convert them. And I would rather switch that around. I would rather they have lots more opportunity than they
Yeah.
could possibly manage, and then not be so desperate at talking the client into a
Right,
fix.
right. Yeah, that makes good sense, definitely. Can you give me just an idea, and maybe our viewers an idea of a few things that might show up on this checklist that shows up on the website, just to give,
The friendlier version.
yeah, just to kind of frame it for folks.
Yeah, so you might say, like, we are most effective in client relationships when these things are true. When the first project is at least this much. When the potential relationship, if everything goes well, looks like this. It's this much. It's at least 120,000. It could be up to 800,000. I'm just making numbers
Hmm.
up here.
Hmm.
Um, when we have direct access to the decision maker whenever that's necessary. When this is important enough, when this is as important to you as it is to us, so that we feel like it's a more collaborative relationship. When when we feel like when you under when you're in your previous experience you've worked with agencies and you understand how great work sometimes takes time and money, when you can be honest with your agency and give us feedback along the way,
Right.
those are the kinds of things that I
Okay.
would put on that
Okay.
list. Yeah,
When you, I assume you do consulting work directly with agencies, right?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, every week I work with a new
Yeah,
one. Yeah.
yeah. So when you're walking in, we're just sort of generalizing here, but when you're walking into a relationship, what do you most often find, and what are the things that you're most often working to help an
Hmm.
agency correct or do better?
Sure.
Is it a lot of what we're talking about here, or?
That's part of it for sure. So it's tightening up their positioning so that they're less interchangeable in the marketplace, and then putting the right lead generation issues in place. That's
Okay.
one. Another would be how understanding the performance of their agency and how to monitor that and what pulling different levers will do to the end results. That's the second one. A third would be understanding how all the roles should work together, in particular how the principal's role should work, and how account service and project management needs to be separate, and how that functions in an agency.
Okay.
Those are the big things I work
Okay.
with.
Okay. Cool.
Yep.
Well, before we sign off, any other advice that you'd like to provide agencies that are watching us today?
Ah, well, I appreciate the invitation, not just for this, but also to participate in your thought leadership survey. I found it very interesting and useful. So I really appreciate it. It's like figure out what you're good at and don't be afraid to only work in those areas and make your business a business and not a hobby, and have really interesting hobbies and a fascinating life outside of work. But your job should be your job, and you should make good money and you should do great work at it. That'd be
That's
my
great.
final piece
That's
of
great.
advice. Yeah.
I like that advice, and I'll take some of it and use it myself.
Okay.
I need some more hobbies. So that's great. Well, listen, really appreciate the time today, David. I know you're a busy guy with lots of agencies that you're helping out. So appreciate you taking the time. Just to remind everybody again, David C. Baker is an author, speaker, and advisor to expert marketing firms, helping them make better business decisions. He's worked directly with over 900 firms, and hundreds of thousands have been through his seminars or read his books for principals. And he can be more information can be found at expertise.is. That's expertise.is. And David, thanks so much for the time today, and wish you a great rest of the year.
Thank you, Mark.
All right,
Appreciate it.
take care.